Welcome to Man in Progress, Forging Manhood. I'm Travis Murray, values coach and your guide to building a life driven by real values. Each week we explore what it means to be a man today, talk about and to thinkers and doers who've been through it, and give you steps to show up better for yourself and those you love. If you're ready to forge your own path, you're in the right place. Let's get to it. In the early morning hours of Chicago, before traffic thickened and before cameras arrived, a gym light burned. The floor was scuffed, the air smelled like dust and rubber. A man moved through drills that no one paid for and no one applauded. Same cuts, same shots, same footwork. Again, not because the season demanded it, but because the work did. The 1990s loved the finished product. Highlights, championships, sneakers that sold out in hours. What it didn't love was the repetition that came before the applause. The years when nothing changed on the outside and everything was decided on the inside. That decade crowned icons, but it also hid the cost of becoming one. Fame in the 90s came without a safety net. No social media to soften the misses, no public therapist language to explain the pressure. You either showed up ready or you were replaced. That environment didn't create values, it exposed them. This episode is not about nostalgia. It's about watching what held when the lights were hottest and the margin for error was thin. It's about values that didn't bend for comfort or approval, values that held because someone was willing to pay for them in private. Men don't usually fail when the moment arrives. They fail earlier. They bargain with the work. They round the edges. They decide that talent will carry what discipline was meant to hold. The 90s punished that lie in public. What survives from that era isn't the fashion or the soundtracks. It's the proof that certain values don't expire. They don't trend. They don't care who's watching. We start with a man whose name became shorthand for winning, but whose real story lived in rooms most people never saw. Michael Jordan and the cost of relentless discipline. In the fall of 1991, the Chicago Bulls opened training camp with expectations stacked high. They had just won a championship. The city expected dominance. What the team got instead was fatigue. Bodies that wanted rest. Minds that wanted to coast. Jordan arrived early, not ceremonially early, working early. Conditioning drills before practice, shooting after practice, weight room sessions that didn't make the schedule. Teammates have said the pace was brutal, not symbolic, brutal. This wasn't new. Years earlier, Jordan had been cut from his high school varsity team. The fact gets repeated like a myth, but the observable consequence mattered more than the emotion. He went back to the gym. He changed his body. He rebuilt his game. By the time the 90s arrived, discipline wasn't a tool he used. It was the structure he lived inside. The pressure wasn't just opponents. It was expectation, contracts, media, a league designed to slow him down with physical defense. The Pistons had tried to break him. They failed, but they forced an answer. He added strength. He learned when to pass. He expanded his patience. Most men want discipline when it looks heroic. Jordan lived it when it was inconvenient, when teammates resented it, when coaches had to manage the tension it created. That tension was real. It fractured relationships at times. It cost him warmth. It made him difficult to be around. That's the part usually skipped. Discipline isn't polite. It doesn't ask permission. It doesn't negotiate with comfort. It demands alignment, or it exposes the lack of it. Men often confuse intensity with discipline. Intensity spikes. Discipline repeats. One looks impressive, the other changes outcomes. Jordan's value was proven in patterns, not moments. Games where he passed instead of forced the shot, seasons where he accepted criticism and adjusted, practices where he set a standard others had to meet or fall away from. Here's the question that refuses to stay theoretical. Where in your life have you softened the standard because holding it would make you lonely, resented, or uncomfortable? Not publicly, practically. Jordan didn't win because he wanted it more. Plenty of men want it badly. He won because he paid daily for a value that doesn't refund the cost. Discipline took his time. It took ease. It took relationships that couldn't survive the pace. What it gave back was relatability under pressure. When the moment came, the answer was already decided. That exchange still stands. The value either holds when it costs you something or it was never there to begin with. Next, we move to a different arena where discipline looked quieter, the pressure came from inside, and the cost wasn't measured in trophies. I'm talking about Tupac Shakur and the burden of unfiltered truth. In 1995, a courtroom in New York emptied slowly. Reporters rushed to phones. Cameras caught the exit, not the weight of what followed. Tupac Shakur walked out carrying a conviction, public outrage, and a sentence that would put him behind bars. He didn't leave quietly. He didn't retreat. Within months, his voice was everywhere. Albums recorded at pace most artists couldn't follow. Lyrics that didn't soften or explain themselves. The setting mattered. The mid-90s music industry rewarded spectacle but punished complexity. Rap was becoming a business empire, but the streets it drew from were still bleeding. Pac stood in the middle of the collision. He didn't clean the language. He didn't distance himself from the contradictions. He spoke as he lived, visibly, loudly, and at full cost. The value under pressure wasn't rebellion, it was truth without filtration. Tupac didn't invent his posture. His mother, Afeni Shakur, had been a member of the Black Panther Party. He grew up around political language, surveillance, and consequence. Poetry came before fame, theater before money. By the time the 90s arrived, expression wasn't a strategy, it was already embedded. What changed was the scale. Millions listened, every word amplified, every misstep preserved. The pressures were layered: legal trouble, violence, media narratives that flattened him into a caricature, industry figures who benefited from the chaos but didn't absorb the risk. He kept recording anyway. Songs like Me Against the World didn't posture strength. They documented isolation, paranoia that wasn't imagined, a man aware that his words were shaping how he would be remembered while also pulling him deeper into danger. Men often think honesty is safe if it's framed correctly. Tupac's life proves the opposite. Truth spoken without armor attracts both loyalty and threat. It removes the buffer that polite language provides. He didn't separate the man from the message. That was the risk. He showed up to interviews agitated, thoughtful, contradictory. He defended causes one day and inflamed conflicts the next. The record shows a pattern of escalation, not because he wanted chaos, but because he refused to dilute what he saw and felt in real time. That refusal had consequences: prison, ongoing feuds, a public identity that became impossible to outrun. By 1996, the tension around him had reached a breaking point. He was shot in Las Vegas and died days later. The facts are undisputed. The cost was final. This is where the conversation gets uncomfortable for men who like values in theory. Truth is not automatically noble. It doesn't guarantee wisdom. It does, however, eliminate hiding places. Most men don't avoid truth because they're cowards. They avoid it because truth clarifies responsibility. Once spoken, something must be done about it. Tupac's life shows what happens when expression runs faster than integration. The value held. He didn't betray his voice, but the environment around him couldn't hold the weight of it, and at times, neither could he. So the question isn't whether you should speak honestly. That's easy to agree with. The harder question is this: are you willing to live in alignment with what your truth demands after it's spoken? Not the applause, the aftermath. Pac's legacy survives because he didn't retreat into safety. It also warns what happens when truth isn't paired with restraint. Words create gravity. They pull events toward them. The value here isn't imitation, it's discernment. Knowing when to speak, knowing what a truth will cost before you release it, knowing that once it's out, you don't get to renegotiate the terms. He paid the full price. The record remains. The music still speaks, not because it was polished, but because it was unprotected. Next, we look at a different kind of pressure, not explosive, enduring. A value tested not by violence or fame, but by staying when leaving would have been easier. I'm talking about Oprah Winfrey and the discipline of staying. In 1984, a small studio in Chicago filled with folding chairs and nervous staff. The show airing that morning was not prestigious. It wasn't safe. It followed a format already proven to fail. Ratings were low. The time slot was worse. The city didn't expect much from a talk show hosted by a woman most viewers didn't yet know. Oprah Winfrey showed up anyway, not with spectacle, with preparation. She read, she listened, she asked questions that didn't protect her from discomfort. The camera caught a posture that wasn't polished, but was present. She stayed with guests when conversations turned messy. She didn't rush to clean it up. The value under pressure here wasn't ambition, it was endurance paired with responsibility. Oprah's early career had already taught her the cost of visibility. She had been fired from a television job in Baltimore years earlier, told she wasn't fit for news. She didn't pivot by chasing revenge or reinvention theater. She accepted a different lane and committed to mastering it. The pressure of the 90s came later. Fame on a scale of few people experience, influence that could shape public conversation, money that removed the need to stay. She could have coasted. Many did. Instead, she tightened her standards. Her show shifted from spectacle towards substance over time. That change wasn't free. Ratings dipped at points. Critics accused her of being too serious. Advertisers watched closely. She adjusted, not by abandoning the value, but by refining how it lived on screen. Men often misunderstand staying. They confuse it with stagnation. Staying, done right, is active. It's choosing to carry responsibility longer than comfort suggests. It's refining instead of escaping. Oprah stayed with her audience. She stayed with her mistakes. When episodes caused harm or misjudgment, she addressed them publicly. Not perfectly, but directly. That posture matters more than the apology language that followed. The cost of staying was exposure. Every misstep archived. Every opinion magnified. Every association scrutinized. She absorbed the consequence rather than hiding behind staff or statements. This is where most men break alignment. They want the authority without the accountability. The influence without the obligation to repair their influence effects. Oprah's value wasn't charisma, it was stewardship, treating the problem as something held in trust, not something owned outright. That trust demanded restraint, it demanded revision, it demanded staying long enough to clean up what success inevitably complicates. There's a quieter courage here than the kind that dominates headlines. It's the courage to remain visible after the shine wears off. To keep refining when the audience is already secured, to resist the urge to burn it down and reinvent when responsibility would be heavier. So the question lands close to home. Where have you mistaken leaving for growth? Where has staying felt like weakness because it didn't come with applause? Oprah's career in the 90s proves this. Staying isn't passive, it's costly. It asks for patience when reinvention would be easier. It asks for ownership when deflection would be safer. The value holds because it survives repetition. Day after day, show after show, decision after decision. That kind of staying doesn't trend. It builds something that can carry weight. Next, we turn to a man whose fame arrived loud, whose resistance came through silence, and whose value was tested by refusing to become what the machine demanded. I'm talking about Kurt Cobain and the refusal to perform a lie. In September 1991, a van rattled through college towns and half-lit clubs. The gear was cheap, the crowds were small, Nirvana was touring behind Nevermind, an album no one expected to detonate. Within weeks, it did. Radio picked up one song, then another. MTV followed. The rooms got bigger. The noise followed him home. Cobain didn't change his posture to meet the moment. He wore the same clothes. He played the same way. When interviews came, he spoke plainly and often awkwardly. When asked to polish the edges, he didn't. The cameras kept rolling anyway. The value under pressure was refusal, not rebellion for its own sake, but a refusal to perform a version of himself that wasn't true. The 90s music machine moved fast. Success demanded availability, branding, and compliance. Bands were expected to sell angst without living it. Cobain resisted that transaction. He wrote songs that carried melody but refused resolution. He showed up on stage and sometimes sabotaged the set rather than turn pain into a product that went down easy. The pressure was immediate and relentless. Fame stripped privacy. Fans projected meaning onto him that he never consented to carry. The industry rewarded the image of disaffection while ignoring the cost of living inside it. Cobain pushed back where he could. He criticized misogyny and homophobia publicly. He wore dresses on stage. He made it clear that anyone who missed the point wasn't welcome. Those actions weren't slogans. They had consequences, alienating fans, angering executives, creating tension within his own band. The record shows a man unwilling to let the crowd define him, even when the crowd paid the bills. Men often mistake refusal for weakness because it doesn't look productive. It doesn't build. It blocks. But refusal has a purpose. It protects the boundary where integrity lives. Cobain's health deteriorated as the pressure mounted. Chronic pain, substance abuse, public scrutiny that never relented. These facts are documented. What's observable is that the same refusal that protected his art also isolated him. He didn't compartmentalize. He didn't build distance between the work and the man. By 1994, the weight had outpaced his ability to carry it. He died by suicide in Seattle. That outcome isn't romantic. It's final. It marks the limit of refusal when it isn't paired with support or containment. This is where men usually simplify the story. They turn Cobain into a symbol of sensitivity crushed by fame. That skips the harder truth. Integrity without structure can become a dead end. Refusal keeps the lie out, but it doesn't automatically build what needs to replace it. Still, the value holds. Cobain never became what he despised. He didn't fake gratitude. He didn't sell a version of the pain he didn't recognize. His music endures because it doesn't flatter the listener. It confronts them. So here's the question that won't stay comfortable. What lie are you performing because refusing it would cost you status, money, or belonging? And if you did refuse it, what structure would need to exist to keep you standing afterward? Cobain's life draws a hard boundary. Integrity can protect you from becoming false. It can't protect you from the cost of standing alone if you don't build something sturdier to stand on. Refusal is a tool, not a home. Next, we close the arc with a man whose fame exploded overnight, whose discipline ran quiet, and whose value was tested by staying invisible when visibility would have been easy. I'm talking about Keanu Reeves and the discipline of quiet integrity. In 1994, a bus barreled through Los Angeles traffic at 50 miles an hour with a bomb wired to its floor. The premise was absurd. The execution worked. Speed made Keanu Reeves a star overnight. Studios called, offers stacked up. The 90s had found another face it could turn into a machine. Reeves didn't take the bait the way the system expected. He passed on roles that would have multiplied the exposure. He took pay cuts so crew could stay intact. He stayed out of the circuits that fed celebrity mythology. No scandals, no reinventions, no loud explanations. The value under pressure was restraint. Reeves' background matters only in what it produced: an unstable childhood, frequent moves, loss early in life. Those facts didn't make him brittle. They made him deliberate. By the time fame arrived, he already knew the attention doesn't equal stability. The pressure of the 90s was speed itself. Faster careers, faster money, faster burnouts, actors who surged and disappeared within a few years. Reeves moved differently. He trained obsessively for roles: martial arts, weapons work, dialects. He treated craft as a private obligation, not a promotional hook. Men often think integrity announces itself. It doesn't. It shows up as consistency that never asks to be admired. Reeves became known on sets for something that doesn't trend: kindness. Crew members have spoken about him learning names, sharing meals, giving up seats, not as performance, as default behavior. Those stories didn't come from interviews. They came from people who had nothing to gain by telling them. The cost of his value was invisibility. In an era built on personality, he refused to cultivate one for public consumption. He didn't explain his pain when tragedy struck later in his life. The death of his daughter, the loss of his partner, these events are documented. His response was withdrawal, not narrative. That choice mattered. He kept his private grief private. He didn't turn suffering into currency. This is where restraint separates itself from fear. Reeves didn't avoid attention because he couldn't handle it. He avoided misuse of it because he understood its corrosion. Men fail here constantly. They're overshare to feel seen. Their posture vulnerability to avoid doing the quieter work of integration. They confuse exposure with honesty. Reeves stayed narrow. Work, training, showing up on time, treating people well when nothing was recording it. The industry kept waiting for a pivot that never came. Instead, he aged into longevity. Decades later, franchises returned because audiences trusted him, not as a spectacle, as a constant. Here's the question that refuses shortcuts. Where in your life are you trying to be known instead of being solid? Where would restraint protect something more valuable than attention ever could? Keanu Reeves didn't win the 90s by dominating it. He survived it by refusing to let it define him. His value held because it didn't need reinforcement. Integrity doesn't need a megaphone. It needs a spine. That closes this fold in the steel. 5 lives, 5 pressures, different outcomes. The values that held weren't fashionable. They were functional, and they still are. The value that remains when the noise clears. By the late 90s, the decade had burned through its success. Careers flamed out, icons aged, the machine moved on to the next set of faces. What stayed behind wasn't the flame. It was the residue of decisions made when pressure didn't ask permission. Look back across these lives and the pattern sharpens. Discipline that didn't ask to be liked, truth that didn't wait for safety, staying when leaving would have looked smarter, refusal that protected the core, and restraint that kept a man intact. Different arenas, same test. The 90s didn't reward values. It exposed whether they were real. Cameras don't create character. They compress time. They speed up consequences. What might take decades in a quiet life shows up in a few years when attention is constant and mistakes don't fade. Men today like to talk about pressure as if it's new. It isn't. What's new is the number of exits available. You can disappear, rebrand, distract, scroll, numb, or explain your way out of almost anything. The 90s offered fewer exits. When the heat came, you stayed in the room or you cracked in public. That's why these examples still matter. Not because they were famous, because their lives show what happens when values are lived without escape hatches. Most men don't betray themselves in dramatic moments. They erode quietly. They loosen standards to keep peace. They delay decisions to avoid discomfort. They say later when the cost is now. Over time, the value thins. It becomes language instead of structure. Every person in this episode paid for their value. Some paid with comfort, some paid with relationships, some with safety, some with privacy. There is no free version. The question isn't whether the cost exists. The question is whether the value you claim is worth paying for when no one is applauding. This is the point where most people want a takeaway, a neat summary, or something actionable. That urge to have that, it misses the point. I want you to sit with these characters that I've explained in the last episode and in this one, and I want you to think about their values. I want you to think about the questions I asked. Go back through and listen. They're at the end of each chapter. Go back and listen to those questions and answer them for yourselves. Where are you in those? The reason I bring this up is because values don't ask to be understood. They ask to be lived under pressure. So here's the question that ends this chapter without closing it. When the noise clears, when the attention moves on, when the room empties, what value will still be standing in your life because you built it to survive the heat? Not admired, not announced, still standing. That's the work. That's the forge. If you're listening to this podcast today, it's because you're doing the work. It's because you're in the forge, forging what matters, a life of values, a life that allows you to stand up. Too many people never stand up for their values because they're afraid of announcing them out loud, afraid they won't live up to them, afraid they'll be exposed, afraid someone will call the bluff. So they stay quiet, they stay flexible, they stay undefined. But a value you won't announce is a value you'll eventually abandon. If this episode hit, don't let it stay theoretical. Pick one value, name it, live like someone is watching, even when no one is. If you're still figuring out what the value is, stay here, follow the show, come back to the forge. Stand in who you are, not in who you fear you aren't. I'm your host, Travis Murray. You're not late, you're not broken, you're a man in progress. And what's forged on purpose stands the test of time.